Hi,
Hello, Merry Turfmas.
Merry Turfmas. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too.
We got dressed up, and what that means at my house is finding the most fancy jewelry because all my makeup is expired. So this is what I have for dressing up.
And I went digging around in my wardrobe and I found a dress. I'm not sure if it belongs to my mother or my grandmother, but it's full sequins and then a full skirt made of this horrendous polyester stuff, but it's quite cool with all its clear
That's
sequins.
amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm loving it when you move and it's just like. And it's 4 o'clock, so we are also having a drink. I've got slow gin and tonic. What have you got?
I've got a Pinot Noir Rosé sparkling.
Lovely. We've both got pink drinks.
Yeah, it's very gender conforming of us.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yes.
Mm-mm. So we decided to do a little like 2021 wrap up video. I was sort of thinking about it like a time capsule, like when you're at primary school and then you bury something about like what tapes you like at the moment, and then in 100 years, the next students dig it out and they're like, "What's a tape?" So maybe we're, putting something on the record for the feminist historians in 2900 or something to be like, what the fuck? Um, they would have had to like archive YouTube onto whatever the new technology is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's who I'm conceiving of as our main audience. um, cool. So should we start with like, I don't know, events of the year, 2021?
Well, 2021 really started out with a pretty big bang here in Australia in February with Victoria pushing through the most draconian conversion therapy legislation globally.
Yep.
No one has been able to best that as yet. There have been debates around the world, but I think Victoria really outdid themselves with this.
Yeah. It's the most extreme of all the states that have it in place in Australia, right? And then the most extreme of any country so far. So well done, Victoria.
Mm-hmm. And as you and I sat through all the debates, the punishing debates, where we saw people prostrating themselves
I
on the
know.
altar of gender ideology and crying and emotions and all sorts of rubbish. And then on the other hand, you had people saying, we need to talk about this a bit more. Here's some facts. Here's some research. Not really sure if it happens in Victoria anymore. And nevertheless, the Dan Andrews administration pushed it through.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dictator Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was such a that really made me lose hope in politics watching that performance. Just so much like emotional manipulation, and I mean, I guess not more than the self ID, but probably equivalent, like just not actually making rational, compelling arguments, really just sort of crying and doing loyalty stuff. Yeah.
I'm an ally, histrionics, people saying I'm so oppressed because of my sexuality. And I'm going, you're an upper house woman in Victoria and you grew up in a home where I believe your parents were professionals in a well-to-do suburb. I'm not really seeing a whole lot of oppression there, but
Yeah.
never mind. Some tears and histrionics, bring it on.
Yeah. So that was the sort of dramatic start to the year, wasn't it? And then I don't know if this is chronologically accurate, but sort of around the first few months of the year, I guess there was the parliamentary inquiry into the vilification law in Victoria. So there was, I guess, because everyone has a stake in free speech, there's at least more community interest than there has been in the conversion therapy and the self ID law. So there were a lot of interested parties there. They had hearings, but the report came back, I think, around May, and the parliamentary committee recommended the law going forward. And then I don't know, a couple months after that, I guess the government, they're supposed to kind of respond to the report. And I've now forgotten the technical term for when they're like, "Yep, let's do that," or like, "Let's accept and take the report forward." But they're doing that, so that's we don't have a bill yet. I guess that's going to happen next year. But the fact that the inquiry report came through and was endorsed by the government means we're going to be getting it
Right.
sometime soon. So there was that.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Tasmania, maybe?
Yeah, so there was some things going on down in Tasmania. When we talk about this, is this to do with lesbians now not being allowed to have lesbian-only events?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a young lesbian down in Tasmania wanted to have an event just for lesbians where she could, what did she say? I'm a drag king and I want to meet my Cinderella. And she applied for an exemption under their anti-discrimination law. Now, hopefully Tasmania does not have sex in their anti-discrimination law. It's now gender, which is also not defined, so deliberately confusing, as we know.
Yeah.
And they basically said no, because you might hurt the feelings of a person with a penis. So you cannot have lesbian events anymore. So she took that to the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal to appeal that decision. So that process is running at the moment.
Oh, good. So that's still ongoing. It's going up the chain.
Yeah, I think they had to put in submissions and there were delays and the usual sort of thing, but it is in motion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And now, I guess another big thing that happened was the New Zealand government having the two, do you call them hearings, or, when they invite verbal submissions, they had the self-ID round and then the conversion therapy round. So quite a few of us, I guess, both you and I, right, made oral submissions to that. Loads of really brilliant submissions. So for me, the most dramatic is still the trans woman dramatically de-wigging during the submission, right, to make a kind of solid point. That was a real standout. And then the fact that they've just recently passed self-ID into law in New Zealand. Well, I guess the legislation has passed and will come into force next year sometime, I guess. So that was like huge for Australasia.
What an example of performative democracy.
Yep.
Thousands and thousands of people submitted, as we know. I think it was well over 6,000. The vast majority were against, with your birth-death marriages bill, were against it.
Yep.
And it passed unanimously. I'm completely flummoxed as to how that happened.
Yeah.
Are they really that stupid?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because so much of what we were saying here in Victoria was that it was like a kind of corruption of the democratic process, because there wasn't even a consultation. There weren't hearings. We couldn't get the kind of result New Zealand got, where at least Speak Up for Women could show like how many submissions there were and how many were against. But I'm now sort of thinking, well, even if we had one, probably just would have gone the way New Zealand's did, right? Like there would have been a lot of opposition, and then the Andrews government would have done what they wanted to do anyway, which is what they always seem to do. So it's maybe it's still good because it raises a lot of awareness. Like New Zealand will have a lot more literacy on what the challenges are in this area, whereas in Victoria or various states where this comes up in Australia, no one's even really heard of it, so they don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think New Zealand's a bit hamstrung by their media, which is entirely state-controlled. So the narrative is whatever the government says it is.
Yeah.
I do think that it probably piqued quite a few New Zealanders if they bothered to look at the inquiry. Whereas here in Australia, I think we have a bit more press coverage. We're definitely not as woke as New Zealand. There's a strong streak of conservatism that runs through Australia that I think people in the metro elites tend to forget. Once you get out of the cities, people are just not on board with this woke nonsense. Yeah. Which is why channels like Sky News, where my platform this year, they've been really great. They keep asking me on. Their numbers have gone through the roof because people are sick to death of hearing the same biased nonsense out of the ABC and SBS, and particularly with COVID. So people are looking for alternative news sources, whereas in New Zealand, I mean, obviously we've got the internet now, so I'm not really sure how many people are accessing their news that way in New Zealand, but I mean, their state-owned media is captured far worse than I think, what's happening here in Australia. So it is a slightly different landscape.
Good.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about the Greens, New South Wales?
Yeah, so here in New South Wales, they push through a law that's colloquially known as Zoe's Law. It could be argued that it's a bit of a step backwards in relation to women's reproductive rights, because it does give sort of rights to an unborn fetus, in that if a woman is abused or attacked or suffers injury in a car accident where someone's driving recklessly and that infant to be, doesn't survive, then there are specific penalties for damaging the fetus.
Oh, wow.
So 2 years ago, we did have our abortion reform law pushed through, where abortion was entirely decriminalised. At the 11th hour, an independent Alex Greenwich, who is a gay man who is affiliated with ACON, managed to get woman completely erased from the legislation, replaced with person. I know. I mean, after 40, however many decades of fighting for abortion laws, and at the 11th hour, a gay man who has absolutely nothing to do with reproductive rights manages to take that away from women. So they pushed through the Zoe's Law, which has, there are arguments to be made either way there, but the Greens put forward this absurd amendment in the upper house where it was literally like, omit the word woman, replace with person. Repeat 23 times. It was a disgusting example of how they're trying to erase women. And it didn't get up. Fortunately, it was rejected, and I did hear it was on the basis that there was a particular politician, a Conservative guy who's actually on the left, who said that if you put this up, I'm going to sit here and debate it all night. And after 4 days of debating, everyone just went, oh, let's all just go home. So it didn't get through on that basis. But clearly the Greens have a very clear agenda to erase any sex-based language in law. And they really demonstrated it with that. But fortunately, we got it into the press. We got it into the Daily Telegraph. We got it onto Sky News. And there was a lot of conversation on social media about it. And by and large, everyone is against it.
Good.
So this bizarre position that the Greens are holding, this extreme gender identity ideology, people are not on side.
Good.
And that was made very clear. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that's like at least a good outcome of a really bad attempt, right? I guess the last thing we were going to mention was the verdict in the Beth Rep case. So that was in the ACT. And I think maybe we'll just mention that. So that was the case between her comments on social media, of comments by her and her followers, being taken, the question being whether they victimized or vilified Bridget Clinch. And maybe I'll just kind of park that, because we're going to come back and talk more at the end of the video about the judgment, right? Because it's got some kind of stuff that I think we both think women in our circles will want to know, because there's a lot of worry, right, about what you're sort of safely allowed to say in this space and not. So I'll just kind of flag that for us to return to. Is there anything you want to mention that's kind of on the horizon, like coming up sort of early next year?
Well, one other thing I just did want to mention for posterity is that an organisation called binary.org, which is on the Conservative side. However, the Conservatives tend to have money. So they did a poll based on sports questions, and it was independently done, and even though they funded it, and it came back saying that Australians overwhelmingly support protections for the women's sports category. It was very definitive. It went anywhere from the sort of extreme, like hard conservative people who vote for a party called One Nation. That was over 80%. The Liberals, which is sort of the right party, was 79%. Even the Labor, which is left, was 75%. And of course, the Greens were right down there at around 50%. So overall, it's about 2/3 of Australians
Could be worse,
when you aggregate it, which is in line with the rest of the world where similar polling has been done. So, my question is, what are those other third? what do they think's happening? Do they still think that it's men who are going through full surgeries and hormones? Because I think if they actually knew, they wouldn't be on side. But because they keep wheeling out these little blonde, blue-eyed 6-year-old boys going, I'm the trans person that you were told to be afraid of in the toilets. And it's like, well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Laurel Hubbards and the Veronica Ivies and the Kirsty Millers of the world. And I think, if people actually saw what was happening and understood that, the numbers would probably be higher. But that was great. That was a really big win because that's something that we can rely on.
That's really good. I'm actually almost proud of the Greens for that number because I would have predicted like 99%, or whatever, whichever direction. Like I know it's not good compared to the others, but it's like, there's even some hope in the Greens.
They're about 50-50. So
that's surprising. Great. And then, okay, why don't we go to talk about our years in brief? What's your 2021 been like personally?
God, well, we've had COVID lockdown number 2. So for me, that was all a bit weird. I got admitted as a solicitor in March, which was massive for me. I had been working in a firm that was commercial and civil litigation in construction, which was nice to have a break from all this gender stuff, but really not where I wanted to be. So I resigned from them with the expectation of joining this new firm, and then lockdown hit. So I had about 4 months where I just focused solely on the gender stuff, which was great. Just, spent the whole time researching, writing letters, building up the platform for Safe Women's Sports. We've got some excellent news coverage. The Olympics happened, so we went global. We were interviewed by all different platforms, which was fantastic. And then I started work with this new firm, which is all very diverse, but still managing to do the Safe Women's Sports at night and try to fit in running my kids around to their different sports. So it's been a pretty crazy year, but, it's ended on a bit of a sour note. I have attracted the wrath of some trans rights activists here in Australia who have sort of engaged in what we could arguably say is defamation, trying to smear my personal and professional reputation, which is pretty silly when you do it in your own name, in a public online forum, and say things that are actually provably untrue. So that was... that was a little bit hard because it was quite personal, and I think one thing when we're in this fight, and we're always talking about, we hear from the other side, the toll, the harm, the devastation, we're all going to commit suicide and blah, blah, blah. But where I'm sitting there going, I've worked so hard and I have these 2 people who are literally trying to systematically just destroy me, just kick me out of the online platforms, silence me, write to the organisations that I have relationships with. It's really quite a personal attack. So I found that really hard. And, I'm crying in front of my little daughters who are saying what's wrong. And I have to try and explain to them that, yes, grown-ups can be bullies too. And so it wasn't great. But the support that I got from people who knew what was happening was amazing. So I'm very, very grateful to the people who reached out. I also had another really weird thing happen where I had an interview with Peter Credlin. Wasn't my favourite interview. Very bad COVID hair, weird top. It was a bit rubbish. I hope that one just goes away quietly and a few thousand people watch it. But it got picked up by men's rights activists in the United States. And I think I stopped looking when I realised it was about 6 million views of a number of different podcasts of these MRAs who literally pick a woman every week and just like mock and humiliate and have a good laugh at her expense. So that was really upsetting because I think the message that they'd picked up from that interview, my message it just wasn't great, but they sort of misconstrued it.
I was going to say,
and then I was like,
is this the guy? Because Kath sent me something and the guy was like interspersing his commentary on bits of yours, but he was just completely misunderstanding everything you were saying. Is that the guy?
Yeah, even to the point where they're saying, well, you would, stupid feminists, this is what they want. This was to do with the sports and the boys playing the girls' netball, like just not regular boys playing netball up in Queensland, and saying, stupid feminists, this is what you asked for. And if they'd identified as girls, you would have had a problem with that. And I'm like, oh, no, they have no idea. Like, they just don't care. They were just picking a woman to have a laugh at her. So that was really weird because you're thinking, wow, all these people are laughing at me. And it's not even my message. And
no, at least if you're going to get picked up by NRAs, you want it to be like spreading the word, right? Like the actual word.
So I was getting like messages at 2 a.m. from like these nutty, just misogynist men. Nothing better to do. I'm just going to fire off a nasty little email full of like swear words and gross things. And I wake up and go, oh, that's nice. What are you at 2 o'clock in the morning? Like, how sad are you? So that was a bit weird because I thought, oh, I get it now when people say, oh, they took my words out of context and it went viral. And I'm like, thank God no one, now that I'm talking about it, but no one really picked up on it that I heard about. So I thought, oh, hopefully it'll just go away. But yeah, that was a good lesson on just messaging and on point.
I mean, that's not your fault though, right? There's nothing you could have done differently to not get picked up and completely misunderstood. That's just really bad luck, right? Like,
yeah. And I was like, fellas, I actually agree with you with all the things you're saying. That was the worst bit. But a big highlight as well that sort of counteracted that hideousness was I was being asked to present a sports journalism award at the Kennedy Awards. So all the awards presenters had 30 seconds to say something. So I just said something about defending women and girls sports. And I was incredibly grateful. I'd never been to anything like that before with the red carpet and the gowns. And after the year we had lockdown, with small children and homeschooling and all the horrors of the gender wars, it was just so nice. To be in that environment, feel like you're back to normal.
Oh, that's great. Gosh, that's a dramatic. It's a lot of ups and downs, isn't it? God. I'm really sorry to hear about the recent, what do we call them, trolls, bullies, or whatever. And I hope that I don't know. I hope it stops. I hope you have a plan.
A few things are in motion. There is also a parliamentary inquiry about online safety where people are being invited to make submissions. So I have been contacted by a politician who said they are going to make a submission. They'd also like to take a few examples of what I've been through. I think also what you've been through. And in my January holidays, when I'm actually not at the firm, I'm going to be having to revisit some of that. And like it is triggering. It is very upsetting having to look at, as you know, when people are saying all these horrible things. And I mean, it does take a toll. And I think the point is that the trolls, they want it to. They want it to defeat you. But I think you have a little cry and you pick yourself up and then you get angry and you talk to your support networks and go, I'm just going to fight harder. I'm not going to let you guys win. Like, there's just no way. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
And you've had a big year. You've been, you've had some ups and downs as well.
A few things. I guess probably the big thing is the starting the website, the No Conflict, they said, just with a sort of rough plan of getting some testimonies together of how women are experiencing women-only spaces being suddenly kind of used by men. And then I guess, unpredictably to me, that kind of taking off and getting a lot of media attention and causing some strife within the university. So it's in the public domain now that there were several complaints made and that process, had to run its course. I was eventually cleared, right? But that there was some stress in the meantime. So that, that took up a good chunk of the year. There were a few sort of smaller things. So, I was scheduled to give a lecture and some students, like a guest lecture into another course. It was actually a debate. The debate topic was whether gender identity should replace sex in policy. and some trans activist students tried to get the lecture cancelled, of course, claiming harm.
Ideas I don't like.
Exactly. So, I mean, that wasn't super. I think probably that was more stressful for the course coordinator than for me, but it's still frustrating that students are kind of constantly challenging, I guess, your right to do your job. And then, yeah, I think maybe I'm probably missing some things, but the most recent was the Obstetrics and Gynecology magazine deplatforming. So I wrote a piece on women-centered language, and they got some complaints from members. Of course they did, because that's this area, but they took the piece off the website, which I think was pretty cowardly and pretty frustrating. Yeah, and I was actually just going to mention, this is not really a proper high and low, but I guess you said the interview with Peter Credlin going kind of badly. I had I had an interview with Rita Panahi, and two things were funny. One, I wore what I thought was a glorious sweatshirt. But then afterwards, everyone I spoke to was like, the absolute fuck were you wearing on the news? Because I had this giant sequined sparkling pearl lobster creeping over the shoulder. Like, why would you have chosen that? Like, it's just like you're there, but it looks like you have like a giant parrot on your shoulder or something. So that was like wrong sweater, I think you said. Like, yes, I've done that as well. And then also the actual thing just was very short, and I didn't give good answers to the questions, and the whole thing was just really bad. And I was like, okay, hopefully nobody ever watches this and that just goes away.
Yeah. I know the media thing is, it's a whole different world, because, you know, you as an academic and philosopher and me as a lawyer, you know, we like to explain things and use all the proper words and go back to the beginning and explain it all methodically. And when you're on the news, that's it. You've just got bang, 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 just get it out. And so I think the first time when I did Alan Jones, I looked like a stunned mullet, but I'm getting better. Getting better. I've had a bit of training, so it gets a bit easier.
Well, I feel like I backslid, because I feel like I started out and was so terrible. Like my first one, I was really stiff, like I didn't move my hands at all, and I didn't know they were filming me, so I was looking all around the studio because I thought they were filming Rita. And then when I watched the clip back, I looked like there was a fly.
Oh, yeah.
So I got a bit better, but then I feel like I didn't do any for ages, and then I just got a lot worse again. So you have to keep it up, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those skill sets. But next year we are going to be on at Current Affair, so Save Women's Sports. Senator Claire Chandler, they keep bumping it because of the Omicron. You know, everyone's freaking out about the flu that nobody has to go to hospital for. So the interviewer has said that it was his preference to do it when ratings went back, which is, I think it starts up again sometime in January. So hopefully we'll get some coverage there, because that's very mainstream. He was a very good interviewer, made me feel very comfortable. I said a few things. I went, oh God, that's probably something you're going to put out there, because that was shit. It's just gonna upset the TRAs a lot, I think. But I'm just speaking truth. That's all I'm doing.
No, good. So, that's amazing. Oh, because I was just watching the Turf Miss, what was it called? That episode of the Turfs Down Under.
Oh yeah, they started this year too. That's another thing. Yeah,
that's right. We should mention that. So that's Stasia and Angela, and they had mentioned tonight Kath and Claire will be on A Current Affair, and I was like, oh God, I forgot to watch that. So I was trying to look it up, couldn't find it, meant to ask you. So that's good to know that's going to be on next year. We can try and get the word out.
Yeah, they do that. They say it's going to be tonight, and then you inflict, A Current Affair on all your friends and family. I think, there was one where it was all just about children's gifts and Christmas carols. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry, guys. It's going to be next year. But that's what happens with live television, I suppose. Well, not live, but commercial TV. Yeah.
Didn't you and Kat recently suffer like an hour of country and Western radio music waiting for a radio segment?
Cairns FM, they had some technical issues, yes. So we listened to country and Western inadvertently for an hour. So that was great.
Great, yeah, really enjoyable.
But yeah, just mentioning Ange and Stasia. So Stasia, who founded Coalition for Biological Reality, which I think is about a year in now.
Yeah.
It was October, not just past, but the year before that she got involved and got that up and running, and has been highly successful in getting people mobilised. And yeah, it's fantastic that we've got Turf Talks down under doing the weekly roundup of all things turf from an Australian perspective, which was very much needed. So it's really good, and I really enjoy listening to it I think it's Fridays. So it's usually Saturday morning chores while I enjoy my cis privilege, hanging the washing on the line and doing kids sport. I listen to it.
Yeah, no, I've been enjoying it too. Really good range of guests, and yeah, great way to kind of stay up to date with what's happening around here, because there's so many of these things, but they're global, right? So it's often things that happen here that don't really get a mention, or they get a passing mention occasionally if someone sends the right email at the right time.
Yeah, and further to Coalition for Biological Reality, they're hosting the panel down in Hobart in February.
Yes.
So that's been rescheduled a few times because of COVID. And there was a bit of scandal around trying to get that hosted at the Hobart City Council. Councillor Jax Fox, that's her name currently. She changed it. Oops, hang on. Can't say her, can I? They brought some complaints to Hobart City Council about this panel for the specific purpose of getting us banned. So this is talking about gender identity in law. You were speaking, I was speaking, Claire Chandler. We have some professors, we have a parent. And Jax Fox was trying to get us banned. And fortunately, the Hobart City councillors, I think they voted her down 9-3, not only on the fact that we should be able to have free speech, but also on a point of contract law that we had signed an agreement with them and they just can't kick us out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Really looking forward to seeing people in person down in Hobart for the night. That would be great. Yeah, but we've got that up and running, and that's Coalition for Biological Reality hosting it.
Yeah, that should be great. I watched the debate, whatever you call it, the session where Jax was trying to get the thing cancelled, and I sort of, it's going to sound bad, but I really appreciated the old white man in the room, because there were many, and they were just so pragmatic about it. They just, stood up and they'd be like, wow, I've always really valued truth and freedom myself.
Yeah.
Just kind of slightly procedural, what is a council for? What have we committed to? It was nice, and it was just not at all taking the bullshit seriously of the young claims. Yeah, it was good.
And again, it was 3 women, 2 who I think are Greens, and Jax Fox, who was Green but now is not. So again, women in Greens, just throwing us under the bus. What is going on? They're like the worst handmaids in the world. Yeah.
I agree. Shall we go and talk about go back to the Beth Rep and the vilification thing a bit? So maybe just a bit by way of preamble, because some people hanging out just outside my window. So if you can hear that, that's just happy people spending time together, just right outside my window where you do. Cool. So yeah, so maybe this is going to sound a bit confused, I think, but in Victoria people are worrying because next year it's almost certain that we're going to get vilification legislation that extends from race and religion only to include gender identity and sex characteristics, which means gender critical feminists are in the firing line for potentially kind of breaching the law. And then one thing we can do is take a cue from what happened in the ACT. I mean, it won't be exactly the same, right? Because the laws will be slightly different, and Victoria's are always more woke. But it's sort of interesting to see what the judge there had decided. And I actually looked into this extensively earlier in the year for a paper I was writing about gender critical speech, but I only really found examples from around the world. So it was great that there was something then coming out of the ACT. So maybe just quickly mention what we're expecting for the Victorian bill, just in case anyone's really worried, and then we could talk a bit more about the judgment. That's just to say, in the original bill from 2019, which we don't know whether we'll go forward in that form or whether there'll be a whole new bill, but that bill didn't modify the existing exceptions, which meant that so long as we were doing feminism, this is anyone gender critical who's interested, so long as we're doing feminism in a way that is for any genuine academic, artistic, religious, or scientific purpose, or any purpose in the public interest, then we are exempted from vilification prosecution.
Right.
So that's just sort of, I think, maybe slightly interesting and reassuring for anyone to know that, of course, if they're just kind of slandering someone, and we'll go on to talk about examples of that, then they might be in trouble. But if they're really just kind of pursuing feminism in a way that's in the public interest, or is for scientific or academic purposes, they're probably fine and don't really need to worry.
Yeah. I mean, we have the same thing here in New South Wales. It's been, I believe these amendments were made, like our Anti-Discrimination Act was 1977. These transgender vilification laws were put into place in 1996.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty, it says it is unlawful for a person by a public act to incite hatred towards, serious contempt for, or ridicule of a person on the ground that the person is a transgender person, or if it's a group of transgenders. But there is, as you mentioned, as a statutory defence.
Yeah.
So you can do that. You can talk about this if it so it's not unlawful to do so if it is a fair report of a public act.
Yeah.
Or if it's a public act done reasonably and in good faith for academic, artistic, scientific research or religious discussion or instruction purposes, or for other purposes in the public interest, including discussion or debate about and expositions of any act or matter. So that's a very clear and broad defence. I think what we're probably worried about, and it looks like Victoria has that in play already, because often our states do copy and paste from other states for similar things. So if they put that in, you'll probably be okay. But the problem is they'll still try to bring the complaints and put you through that process, because the process is the punishment.
Yes.
And then they'll say that on social media they're being charged with transgender vilification. They have to go through this process, and then you will have to defend yourself. So, I think that's where the problem is going to be. So, I mean, we're all sort of on tenterhooks waiting for, Beth Rep, obviously, she's been through it. It's probably only a matter of time before it happens again.
And that's an interesting case, right? Because that intersects with the new stuff about, the fact that she was held responsible for what other people's comments on her thread. So I guess it's intersecting with this new stuff about Facebook pages or groups or whatever being responsible for that stuff and being whatever the word is, punishable, held responsible.
I don't think, that part of the decision, I'm not sure that's going to be able to hold up, because you really, look, on Facebook, I guess when it's your page, you can delete people, but on other platforms, you can't. On Twitter, you can't delete other people, so you can't be held responsible. I think if that was tested, I don't think you could hold that up. Really?
No, you must be right about Twitter given the structure, but I think that was the move for Facebook, right? Because it changed all the... Wasn't that the big fight between the, the social media companies and then the business interests in having pages, because it suddenly makes it like small businesses that are promoting their goods through Facebook. It's now very expensive for them because they're liable if anyone, so they have to pay moderators. So it's like a very... I guess dramatic thing to do, right? But it's a way of keeping trolling or bullying down.
But then you're putting it onto the individuals. It should be the platform. They're offering the service.
Yeah, it's true.
I think it should be on them.
Yeah. No,
personally.
I don't disagree with that.
But when Beth appealed her decision, I thought the outcome, it was definitely a partial victory. That $10,000 fine was reduced to $5,000. There was crowdfunding to support her with that. I mean, she's gone silent on social media. I think she might have even either stepped away from her job, or I don't think she lost her job. I think she stepped away. It was all just too hard. But one thing that came through in the decision, which is, sorry, I'm just looking at it here, that was excellent, that said that, so it was a tribunal decision, it wasn't a court of law, but it said that discussion and debate on the nature and position of trans women is in the public interest, and that calling a trans woman a man will not necessarily be vilification.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Great. And the public, and the fact that there's like whether it's a precedent or not, but like the fact that it's on the record that someone is saying it's in the public interest, which it clearly is, that's really helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, it's good law until it gets overturned. So I don't know if you can quite say it's a precedent, but it's there in the decision now, and it can be relied upon. Similar to my Forstater, hers was a tribunal decision. So the employment tribunal, but then it got appealed in a court, didn't it? So that was even stronger. But we can rely on Maya in Australia.
Yeah, okay, good.
When it's a novel area of law, you can look to other jurisdictions, similar jurisdictions. Like, we're not obliged to follow that. We're not bound to follow it, but it can be.
Yeah, good.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be awfully, because I think you're right that, like, even if we are on pretty firm ground about just speaking our minds, the trans activists are going to use these processes in an attempt to get at someone, and that is going to be a stressful fight, right? So whoever it is, it's just going to have to be prepared to fight it until there's like vindication on the record, like there was for Maya, and then everyone else can speak more freely, right? Like this just is coming next year or the year after, or
but all these trans activists, like, they think that Twitter is real life.
Yeah.
In my working job, and the people that I talk to, and the level, these are all professional, barristers and lawyers and politicians and people that I speak to. Like, no one's on side with any of this.
Yeah.
They're really not. So if someone tries to pull a stunt like that, I can tell you right now that there are a lot of barristers and lawyers who would be prepared to step up and fight that, because, number one, it's novel. They probably get media coverage, and it might set precedents. So, the trans rights activists just think that they can hound us into submission, and that we're not supported, and that people are on side. It's a lie. It's just not reality.
Yeah.
Because Twitter is not real life.
Was my favorite part of the Dave Chappelle special when he said, "I don't care because it's not a real place." Whatever that exact line was. It's so great. I thought we could just finish by going over a few of the things that the ACAT, what do you call that, tribunal?
Okay.
ACAT tribunal?
ACAT,
ACAT said were vilification, and I've written them down. I don't know how we want to, maybe I'll just say a few, and then if you want to intersperse any comments, we just do it like that. There's only, I think, 8 or 9. Just to kind of give people a flavour of how extreme something needs to be in order to count as vilification. And maybe some of them will think they're not that extreme, and then we'll want to talk about them a bit. So the first one, and actually maybe I'll bundle that with the other one, these two kind of comment on the genitalia in a really graphic way. So one is, and I'm quoting, "Excuse me while I hurl my guts up at the thought of an open wound being compared to a vagina." And then the other one, which I'll put together because it's similar sort of flavor, again, I quote, "They really are deluded if they think the hairy, pus-filled, surgically created cocks turned inside out are vaginas. No Bartholin's glands, no ability to self-clean and lubricate. Typical for a man to think a vagina is just a hole."
Okay. I mean, that's pretty graphic and grotesque. Is that regarded as vilification? That was regarded as vilification?
Both of them were.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I can sort of see why, right? Like, it's targeting at a particular individual in the context of these posts, and then it's really like graphic and contemptuous, or maybe there's a better word of like, of their body, right? Like, of a part of their body. So the reason,
All right. So, it's this is not legal advice, but word of warning, probably best not to not to put that in writing. What else did they say? Were there some sort of other?
Yeah, I actually have the reasoning, but I realized I can't put it up because of the way I'm recording the screen.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry. So, yeah.
But I would think, if people are going to be concerned, it's probably, I would just, even setting aside that I'm a lawyer, I would say it's probably best not to attack individuals or groups of individuals. I suppose that will come out of the transgender vilification groups of transgender people. But I think that, if someone says something that you don't like or you don't agree with, oftentimes all you need to do is like repost what they said, and you don't even need to write commentary. Yeah. You just let other people read it and say, oh, look what they've said now. And that's enough. You don't have to sit there and go, this is abhorrent, this is grotesque. Yeah. That kind of thing. It sort of speaks for itself. And also just not attacking individuals, like attack their argument.
Agreed. The thing is, even if you are attacking the group rather than the individual, I think there are certain things like that the inciting hatred kind of came up, or inciting violence came up in the reasoning quite a bit. So if people are interested, you can download the judgment, and then in the last part of the document it gives each quote, like the comment at issue, and then explains the tribunal's reasoning, so people can have a look for themselves at the reasoning if they're concerned. But I think anything that is really like emotional disgust, contempt, those kind of emotions, like, oh, that, the way these quotes describe the genitals, right? They're not just saying, oh, look, this is what the procedure is, and it's hard to compare that to a vagina in kind of amicable terms, right? They're using this really emotionally loaded language to kind of other the person who has that thing. And so that's kind of easy to see that as a crossing of the line, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple that refer to penises, which I thought were quite interesting, because for me it wasn't totally clear why the tribunal found so. So one was, and I'm quoting, I just went on Bridget's page, penis people once again bullying women, biology is reality. And the tribunal found that the second part was fine, biology is reality is fine, but the first part, penis people once again bullying women and using penis people to refer to Bridget, was vilification. And that shows up in a few other comments too. So one was, Bridget Clinch is a male bully, and the Greens letting him swing his dick like this. I'm showing this to every female supporter I know. So it was like these ones that refer to the genitals of the trans woman, which, arguably can be important to point out, especially in the kind of arguments about how to refer to rapists or whatever. But these were found by the tribunal to be vilification. So I thought that was quite interesting.
It's interesting that this is all vilification, but similar things are said about women and our body parts, and that doesn't really rate a mention. That's not seen as vilification, sex vilification.
No, but it might be soon, if the Victorian bill adds sex characteristics, which they propose to. The alleged justification for the whole bill was to reduce online misogyny. So it could very well be that women end up, that was one of my arguments at the time, that like they're selling it as a way for women to prosecute misogyny, but what will actually end up happening is that men will use it to prosecute women for not accepting them as women. So you have to like trade off who's going to get more benefit and harm out of this, but I think that there is this idea that we can now capture all that really misogynistic language directed at women's genitals or women's bodies, if it's emotional and contemptuous in that same way.
Okay. That's good. I think, a lot of women, we've copped so much of that. We almost just don't care. You care, but you're not going to go and make a complaint. You just take a screenshot, add it to your file.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I guess if you're from a privileged group, then being bullied in that way is shocking to you because it's the one time it happened, right? So you would think, oh, I shall use the law to defend myself. Yeah, whereas you're right. Women are like, Well, that happens a lot. I'm just just
Yeah.
deleted the email.
Yeah. Well, we've all sat there and laugh. I mean, what else can you do but laugh? But, shared the most gruesome sort of threats that we've had. And it's
Yes.
like dismemberment and burning at the stake and like really graphic, horrible stuff. And
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
you do just kind of get acclimatized, right? Like,
yeah, desensitized to it.
so there's another couple, and again, I think maybe it's sort of clear because there's these long lines of like very descriptive negative terms, but maybe I'll just mention those two as well. So one says, how ridiculous that you have to lie and pander to these anti-women delusional haters. The good thing is that everyone knows that Bridget is a man, no matter what he dictates people call him. Even the anti-women men and handmaidens know he's a man. We can laugh at how pathetic he is and know he's angry that no one actually believes his delusions. The only reason he's being supported is because he's helping support men's misogynistic views and desperate attempts to control women. And then very similarly, another comment had, Bridget, you're a narcissistic bully. You aren't being supported because people believe your delusions. They're just using you to further their anti-women agenda. This might be the same person, actually. Clearly, you love trying to dominate women, but we are laughing at you. Women that I have talked to today are so shocked by your hatred and attempt to dominate and silence women. Beth having to apologize for stating facts show how hate-filled towards women you are, and your need to control women like the misogynist you are is backfiring big time. And then there's one more of that same flavor that's about silencing and controlling. It says, the fact he won't accept, he will clearly go to great lengths in order to silence women from speaking up, going so far as to refer to women using slurs to promote his insidious agenda. He will never know true womanhood.
Okay.
So I guess
that was vilification?
They all were, those three. And so I think from remembering the reasoning, it was really to do with this claim that he's a misogynist, that he wants to control, silence, dominate, oppress. And I don't think there was nothing saying that a feminist couldn't have that view of men. But the idea was that if you couldn't have that view of a trans woman because it discriminates on the basis of what genitals he happens to have by making him a man. That seemed to be the reasoning.
Seems really clumsy to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know I think there was a media statement that said that Beth didn't want to appeal. Neither side wanted to appeal, so I think it's not going to go any further.
Yeah.
Look, if the tribunal said that's vilification, it's worth women knowing that that's what qualifies.
Yeah.
I think maybe if you applied that to other groups, I don't know. Like, it seems to me that the bar is really low.
I agree with you.
For that.
It's tricky, right? Because part of our argument is that they are not a third group, right? It's not that there are men, women, and trans women, and we need to not vilify trans women. It's like there are men, and some of them claim to be women. And we're going to go on saying, as feminists, the stuff we've been saying about men all along, and we're not going to make an exception. But that is precisely what the court seemed to be not allowing, right? They were like, oh, you're treating this man as though his genitals determine his life chances, and that's discrimination. He's a woman, right? And so you can't call him a misogynist or say that he's trying to dominate women. That stuff doesn't apply to him because he is an exception, right? That seemed to be what was in the background. And I just thought, well, that's odd because those comments are like, there's a lot in there that I think would have quite widespread agreement in terms of sentiment among gender critical feminists, right? Maybe not the language, but the idea that this is a move from a position of power and privilege rather than a move from oppression.
And look, I mean, I don't know what Clinch did to have the women reacting to him in that way, by saying what they said. That would be interesting to know, that what elicited that response from them. I wonder if the tribunal took that into consideration. because I think we've all seen examples of males with trans identity conducting themselves in a way that is very familiar to us, because it is, it's how men act when they are thwarted, or we won't shut up or sit down or do what we're told. So you're right, we shouldn't have to make exceptions for that kind of behaviour simply because that man has claimed a special self-declared identity, which is exactly what we've all been saying in the gender critical movement from the get-go.
Exactly. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if they're just reacting to the fact that he pursued rep through the courts, right? Like, I'm sure her original comments weren't that bad, and then he keeps escalating it. Right, and then trying to sort of have her publicly sanctioned for her views, which is just what we all think, right? That person is not a woman, right? And then it's so it is a display of male power, right? And if all these women are just commenting like, "I'm not going to shut up, you can't control me,"
Yeah. And it is a chilling effect, because, we're sitting here going, okay, women, you probably all need to have a look at the decision. Keep it in mind when you're posting, keep things circumspect, maybe not put it in writing, just don't put everything you think in writing.
Because there's definitely I think that everything is exempt that is private. So you can say what you need to say over dinner in your own home, or on the phone, but maybe just don't put that in a public Facebook or Twitter feed if it's going to be of that flavour. The last, there's actually one more, but I ran out of time to write it down. It was about him not passing, so I guess that was sort of appearance-based commentary. So that was found to be vilification. But the last one that I did write down was It's
extraordinary. So you're getting into trouble because it is a male person who is performing female stereotypes with hair and grooming and presentation, and because you don't buy that presentation, that presentation doesn't pass for you, that qualifies as vilification. Is that?
Well, I think it's that they said it, right? So I think he had been invited as a speaker to this one woman project thing, and so some women were furious that a man has been invited to speak at a women's conference, and then they wrote on the thing under it, and I didn't write down the comment, but it was something like, this misogynist has no place speaking at a women's conference. Does he think he passes? Ha ha ha, he doesn't. This kind of flavor. So I think it was probably targeted harassment type stuff, and then gratuitous comments on his appearance, that type of thing.
And as a woman, I mean, that's pretty much par for the course. We've all had horrible comments about weight, appearance, clothes.
I know, but that's what I mean about this. If you're used to being treated with respect, and then you suddenly cross over into a territory of not being, maybe it's shocking to you, and you think, I better take this person to court because the one time I got an insult. I don't know.
Because that's what, what do they think women is? It's like baking cupcakes and wearing dresses, I mean, it's just...
so right,
I think we can all read between the lines on this one.
Okay, final one I wanted to mention, because I think it should be obvious to everyone that this is where the line is. So there was a post claiming, I guess this post was probably by a trans activist, and it was saying TERF normally means trans exclusionary radical feminist, but some people think the E better stands for eliminationist or exterminationist, because that's how much gender critical women hate and want trans people gone, this usual emotional hyperbolic nonsense. But Beth then came in and commented, true story, tag yourself, I'm an exterminationist, and then put the googly eye emoji.
Oh dear.
And that, I think, is extremely stupid, because if you know where the line on anything with hate speech is, it's at incitement of violence. If you call, for the, you call that group of people cockroaches who should be stamped out or something, that's where the line is in almost every country. So that was very stupid of her, I think.
It was very inflammatory.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this all happened quite some time ago. I think things have definitely, like changed in the landscape. There's enough groups out there. I know there's a lot of us meeting up in person. You know, maybe not have rants online like that.
Get those feelings out
just,
in person.
you know, argue, you know, engage with the substantive nature of the argument. We don't need to attack individuals to make our argument. And I think, you know, Kelly J. Kim Minshall always says this: stop arguing with TRAs on Twitter. It is a waste of time. Go and do something. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's not going to get us anywhere. It's just going to paint a target on your back.
Yeah. No, I mean,
you know,
that kind of stuff is serious. Like, if they can sort of show that you are inciting violence against a minority group, you're really at risk. And that's not just like a small fine and that those are the ones that actually get taken all the way through. Like, I think the few cases for religion that have actually made it all the way through the process, that's what they've been. So like that should be.
Don't go there.
If you learn anything from this, it's like, definitely don't talk about anyone getting killed. Like, that's extermination. Like that is definitely across the line. And then probably targeting people's genitals and stuff with disgust remarks, that's probably across the line. And then there's a question mark, like they've decided some things are across the line that we probably would disagree should be across the line, but it's useful to know that.
Keep it in mind. And just try not to attack individuals. You know, engage with their arguments. And, you know, just be classy. Don't stick to their level, I think, you know. And if you have a bad day with the TRAs, you know, find a friend. Have a slow gin online and on the phone, and have a whinge and a vent verbally. Don't put it in writing. You know, but just keep it classy. We don't need to stick to that level. I think totally. And we just don't want to see any more of our RADFEMs or GCs going down for stuff that they don't need to.
That's the thing, and because I've been thinking about this on and off all year, like trying to work on this paper about whether, you know, which of our speech as gender critical feminists is vilifying or is hateful, if any of it. I'm very tuned in, so occasionally Kelly J might say something in a video that I'll think is kind of borderline, or actually Turf Talk recently, that there was these kind of emotionally loaded words they were using, like deluded and something, and I thought, probably fine, but maybe on the fence. Like, so now, like, watching, like, that they might now be a target. It's shit to have to worry about it, but it's like we would all be sensible to kind of get a clear sense of what the legal lines are.
Absolutely. And just stop complaining on social media so much. You know, write some letters, go do some direct action, go chalk some sidewalks. Like the women down in Melbourne, I think we'd get much better traction with that.
Totally agreed. Well, it's been lovely to talk to you. And
you too.
I hope that 2022 is less dramatic for you and for us in general.
I think, you know, we've got, just on a high note, we've got Claire Chandler's bill that she's going to try and push through before the federal election. Now, Claire is not up for re-election in this next cycle, so we've got her for a while longer, thank goodness. But hopefully that bill will get into the public domain. There'll be more conversation in Australia. Hopefully it'll go through, and we will protect women's sports for women. So I think that will really get the conversation started here. So that would be a great win for the beginning of the year.
That'll be awesome. Okay, hopefully we'll talk again at some point soon.
Okay. Thank you, Holly. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy
All
New Year.
the turbans.